I work as a special education teacher with young children at a daycare. When the younger kids act up, they're sent to me and I calm them down. There was one little girl who normally responded very well to art, so I gave her a box of chalks and invited her to draw her feelings on the chalkboard. I turned my back to punch holes in some paper and looked around to see her standing close to me, grabbing my shirt in her hand. I asked if she was done with the chalk, and she said yes. I took the box from her and turned to see she had drawn something very small, roughly shaped like a man's face in the corner of the board. He had sharp teeth and was drawn from the neck down, bumps protruding from him, and there was something like a snake coming from his ear. Concerned, I asked her what she had drawn and to tell me about the picture. She looked over to the corner of the room and stared there for an uncomfortably long time, during which I was unable to get her attention, until she quietly said, "I don't know," and then sat down. Nothing in my life has given me more chills than that. My girlfriend and I were chilling on the couch at her parents' house, talking about random things from her childhood, and her mom comes in and says, "Annette, have you told him about Charlie yet?" I immediately lit up at the thought of an embarrassing story, but my girlfriend, she started to look rather uncomfortable. The mom proceeded to explain anyway. The story went like this. When my girlfriend was about 4 or 5 years old, she got a new doll for her birthday or something, one of the big ones. My girlfriend was tiny at the time and could fit into the box of the doll. Apparently, she would climb into the box and freeze up and stay in there, just like a doll herself, until the mom would open up the box and pull her out. Once pulled out, she would pretend to be somebody else, somebody by the name of Charlie, a name none of her family members or friends recognized, possibly something she'd seen on TV, or a name that was read to her in a book or something. Anyway, this continued for weeks apparently, and she would just do weird things. It was as if she had altered her mind somehow and truly believed she was this Charlie thing. The mom talked about how, as Charlie, the girl would eat foods she never liked, draw different pictures, and act differently around her 2 older brothers. She would only snap out of it when put into the box and taken out again. Here's the creepy part. One day, the mom heard a knock on the door. She opened it up to see her daughter standing there with a blank expression. She figured she must have gotten outside from around the back of the house. The girl said, "Where's Annette?" The mom replied, "I don't know. Maybe we should go find her? Why are you looking for her?" Or something to that effect. Apparently, Charlie replied, "I want to kill her." It was then that the mom decided this game had gone too far and stopped indulging in it anymore until Charlie stopped showing up. Creeps me right out, though. I was about 11 at the time, and we lived in a house that had strange things happen all the time. Nothing like crazy. Little things like bumps in the night and stuff being where you didn't leave it. I remember it was around Halloween. We were buying stuff for a party at the end of the month, and my mom bought some rubber mask. My little brother grabbed one as well, and it was a typical red devil mask. We had an attic, and we always kept it closed. This day, my brother, who was 2 or 3 at the time, was running around with the mask on. He was laughing and stuff, and out of nowhere, he just went completely silent. My mom and I got concerned because he was quiet for a few minutes. We went looking for him and saw him in the hallway, staring straight up at the open attic. My mom called out to him, and he didn't respond or acknowledge her. It was like he was in a trance. My mom pulled him away from the attic's opening, and he started laughing again like nothing happened. What made it more creepy was He had tears in his eyes when we took the mask off. Back in 2003, my family and I were moving into a house. It was an old house, and used to belong to an army vet who fought in Korea. According to the neighbor, he died by having a heart attack. We moved in, and the house felt really nice, honestly. Like it seemed like the perfect chill place. It was huge, and it had these secret rooms in 2 of the closets. My little brother got one room with a closet, and I got the other. I found a big coin in my little closet room. Like, it wasn't money, but it was really big and had a little eagle on it. Felt like it was handmade. A few days passed, and I had a good feeling about the house. My parents decided to leave to fill up on groceries and stuff. I was left alone with my little brother. I told him to play with his toys, as he had a ton of Lego pieces and Bionicles. He went to the closet to play. He'd always make these little sound effects, but out of nowhere, he stopped. He started giggling and laughed, and I could hear him running around. Then, I heard what sounded like more footsteps running around. I started feeling uneasy. I got to his room and he stopped playing, and I swear I saw the closet door slowly closing. I tried to reassure myself, but I had that feeling in the back of my mind that maybe something spooky was going on. I asked my little bro what he was doing. "I'm playing with Jeff. He was a soldier." I realized that some of his little green soldiers were on the floor, like those small ones, the kind everyone had as a kid. "Well, pick Jeff up," I said. "Let's go watch TV." "Why would I pick Jeff up? He can walk himself. I'll just get him out of the closet." I took him outside to play some soccer, avoiding any eye contact with the windows of the house. Screw this house. No one but my little brother ever saw Jeff, but we would hear footsteps and sometimes voices whenever someone was showering. The guy who lived there before wasn't named Jeff, so I don't know what it could be. When I was 18, I worked as a camp counselor and got assigned a group of snotty 6-year-olds. I made friends with a quiet girl who hardly spoke, never caused trouble, seemed a loner. The whole camp took the kids to Fort Mifflin in Delaware, an old Civil War fort. I had never been there before and knew nothing about it. I sat with this girl on the bus, and she was acting normal. She asked where we were going. I told her, and she had no idea what I was talking about. The tour guides took kids in small groups to various parts of the fort. It was our group's turn to tour the casemates, these cool old bunkers beneath the fort. We headed down these sort of claustrophobic stairs. The girl was squeezing my hand, little nails digging into my palm. As soon as we got to casemate 11, this always quiet girl went nuclear, having this seizure-like fit, screaming, "There's a dead man here! There's a dead man here! He's looking at me!" I left the rest of my group with my assistant to take the girl topside. Eventually, she calmed down. She wouldn't answer any questions about it, and asked to go sit on the bus, never speaking about it again. Much later, I learned that a Union Army deserter was kept in solitary down there for a while before he was hung on sight. I learned about it years later when some TV shows started visiting that specific casemate for their ghost hunts. Just this past weekend, my husband and I were looking after his cousin's little girl while her parents were away for a wedding. She's 4. And she has this imaginary friend named Petey that lives in her house and sleeps in her closet. According to her mom, she's been talking to him since she was 2. Anyway, I was sketching on the couch when she climbed up next to me and asked me if I could draw Petey so she could give it to him as a present when she gets home. But I don't know what Petey looks like. She described him to me. and I drew him while she watched and told me if I did something wrong. He has messy black hair like yours, but shorter. Okay. And he always wears this yellow shirt with a big smiley on it. Cool. And his face is all red and purple and blotchy. Okay. Petey has one of those weird port wine stained birthmarks or something. And he wears a big thick rope as a tie. What? I drew a rope as an actual tie, hanging down low on his neck. No, it's up higher, here! She drew a circle around the middle of her neck. I erased the previous attempt and lightly drew around his neck like a noose, thinking to myself, this is really bad if this isn't what she means. I'm tainting the mind of a 4-year-old. But she said, yes, like that. After she went to bed, I burned that thing. She forgot to ask for it when she got home. If this were a horror movie, Petey would have been a ghost who hung himself in her closet. My younger brother constantly claimed to see ghosts from the time he was about 6 until he was 8 or 9. I remember at first he would come to us and tell us about them all excited, but after a while he would only tell us if we asked, and the entire time he would rub his eyes with his fingers and cry. He's 16 now, and I texted him last night to ask if he remembers seeing ghosts, but he never answered. I'll let you know what he says if he decides to text back, but I come from a superstitious Catholic family, one of those enormous ones with people dying all the time. Other members of my family, older ones, claim to have their dead parents looking out for them, and things like that. My brother was the only one of us who saw things constantly, though, and not just dead family members. I have a lot of stories that he told me from when he was younger. Some are good ones, and some of the scarier ones he'd tell me in whispers with tears streaming down his face. The two that scared me the most were the ghosts he said visited our room at night. One was allegedly a cowboy who paced back and forth next to his bed, never looking at him. He said that once the cowboy tried to touch him, and he screamed, so the cowboy left. The other ghost was a girl who looked exactly like me, but wore a ragged and ripped-up white dress, and had long black hair that swam around her head. He told me that her eyes were red and hollow, and her mouth was a gaping hole, but she was unmistakably me. She floated barefoot at the foot of his bed, and appeared to him only once. He covered his face with his blankets, but every time he peeked out at her, she would scream at him. He says he cried all night, from the time she appeared at around 2 a.m. until the sun came out and she disappeared. My cousin. She was one of those kids who adults loved, but who was constantly doing cruel things to other children for no reason. Extremely manipulative. She left me alone because my father was her mother's favorite older brother, but everyone else was fair game. I remember once that we played Bloody Mary in the school bathroom, and when the lights went out, one girl started absolutely shrieking, and when flipped back on, she had these ragged, deep, bloody scratches down her arms and face. Of course, all the girls thought it was Bloody Mary, but I remember looking at my cousin, who was usually talkative, and she was silent, but had this weird grin on her face. She was the only one of us who had long nails. What scares me about her is that, last I heard, she was back in grad school, in the process of becoming a psychiatrist. The thought of someone who derived so much pleasure from inflicting pain, and who was able to manipulate adults so well as a child that she was able to mask her behavior, working in that kind of position in the mental health field, terrifies me. My SO's niece has always been an absolutely fearless and very thick-headed child. As a toddler, she's always been the type to burn her fingers in a fireplace, cry for a moment, and then go back to try to touch the flames again. or try to jump off a balcony, or pet a giant dog she doesn't know, or go home with a stranger. Things like that, all the time. She's just not scared of anything. This past summer, we were all vacationing together in a very popular girls' camp cabin that we'd rented in the mountains. She was nearly 3 at the time and couldn't talk well. We'd been there for about a day and a half, and we're all having a great time. She was running around playing, and I was in the kitchen, when I heard the most blood-curdling, bone-chilling scream that I've ever heard in my life. It was horrifying. I'd been standing by the kitchen door and hallway, so I was the first to reach her. I stepped out into the hall and saw her running as fast as she could, with tears streaming down her cheeks, screaming like some monster was on her heels. Like I said, I've never heard a kid, or anyone for that matter, scream like this. You get kids screaming because they're mad or scared or sad, and it's nothing like what she was doing. She reached me in no time flat and leapt into my arms, shaking like a leaf, and I still couldn't get her to stop. By then, her parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, everyone was gathered around trying to figure out what was going on, and I was just rocking her while she clutched me so tightly it hurt. And then she started to sob out words. "Baby, eyes, baby," and she pointed to the end of the hallway, a dead end, and started screaming all over again, this time shouting, "Coming! Run! Run!" We got her away from the hall, and she finally started to calm down. But if you mentioned it and asked her what had happened, she would melt down all over again. A few hours later, and she was perfectly fine, so long as we didn't talk about the baby. I took her upstairs to sit on a couch while we waited for my SO to change clothes in a room next to us. I went to sit down, and again it started. She began to scream that horrible scream again, clawing at my neck and face as I tried to sit down. She started telling me again to run, and then she pointed at the chair. Then her finger trailed down the hall to stop at an open doorway like she was following something's path. This happened once more. I heard her screaming my name and found her in the room that she'd pointed to, shaking and crying and telling me that the baby was there. The rest of the weekend was no fun for her. She, a child who normally enjoyed life to the fullest, would just sit at the door and beg to go home. At one point, I even found her trying to work the doorknob so that she could leave. Everyone tried to nervously laugh it off. Even now, if something strange happens, they just jokingly blame it on the ghost baby. But you cannot do it if she's around, because she will completely fall apart and start crying that the ghost baby is going to come and get her. Working as a teacher, I had a kid who was very likely sociopathic. Other staff often labeled him as super cute and had a great smile, but the kid was disturbingly good at getting large groups to follow him, and there was always something off and kind of fake about his happy tone of voice, like it was coming from someone 10 years older. From time to time, kids who I'd known to be a follower of his would do something wrong and completely out of character, but it was always difficult proving he was actually the cause of it. One day, on the playground, I noticed he kept relocating his group out of earshot of staff. When the staff moved, the group moved somewhere else. I kept close enough to be noticeable to them, and eventually the kid came up to me and said something like, "Don't you think the younger kids need more attention right now?" And I said, "Nope, I think I'm right where I need to be." To which all emotion disappeared from his face. He looked me dead in the eye and coldly said, "No, I think you need to go somewhere else right now." Then gave a large smile and went back to his friends. I referred to him as Manson to the other staff from that day forward. Another user asks, "Did you ever find out why he required privacy?" They reply, "Not really, but they were always visible, so probably nothing too concerning." However, a common control tactic is separating the people you're trying to have power over from anyone who could interfere, so it was something to keep an eye on. The scary part is they usually try to establish that as the norm, and that's when real trouble starts. More than likely on that day, he was just going to run a game of Among Us, which was big at the time, and then subtly convince a kid to throw mulch or something that would be hard to trace back to him. Around 4 or 5 months ago, at like 3 a.m., I was awoken by a very weird growling sound. Disoriented and in the dark, I started to come to, and for the life of me couldn't figure out what the sound was. I had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room, which added to my confusion. I was thinking maybe the cat had caught something, but really, I had no idea. As my vision started to come around, I saw this 3-foot grotesque-looking shadow thing start to appear a few feet in front of me, just standing there growling. Even though in reality it took only a few seconds to figure out what was going on, I imagine my appearance was one of a man visibly shaken. It was my son. My 3-year-old son had snuck out of bed at 3 in the morning, found his Hulk mask in the dark, and decided to go find Daddy to play superheroes. I guess his idea of playing was to do a Hulk growl 2 feet from my sleeping face until I woke up in a panic. He ended up doing the same thing to my wife a few weeks later, which to me was way more hilarious. My kid's Catholic school is over 100 years old. There's a basement under the gym that's used for storage. I was subbing once, and during recess, one of the kickballs went down the stairs. A little girl was standing at the top of the stairs, yelling down, "Just throw it up to me." I went over and asked who she was talking to, and she replied, "That big guy down the stairs." I went down and searched, and there was nobody down there, and that staircase was the only way in. I asked some of the other kids if they've seen the man before, and they said yes, but Sister told us not to talk to him. I asked them to describe Sister, and they described a nun. There haven't been nuns at the school in 40 years. A good friend of mine and her husband bought what's considered an old house around here. This is Western Canada, so there's not many houses over 100 years old. They were renovating the basement one day while I was visiting. I was down there alone with their son, who was barely 2 years old at the time, and could not yet speak in full sentences. He took my hand and led me over to a brick chimney-like thing, with a rusty metal door on it. He looked up and said, "That's where the dead babies go." I was horrified. Firstly because, like I said, the kid could barely talk, let alone say something like that. I doubt he even knew what dead meant. I'm positive that no one would have told him that, and there were no older kids around that would have said that as a joke. Still creeps me out to this day. When I was a teenager, I was babysitting for a family with 3 young children. The boy was about 8 and the girls were in kindergarten. Their parents had driven an hour away to see a play, but still planned to be home early in the night. However, I got a call that they had been in a minor car accident and would be home a couple hours later than planned. They asked several times how and if the boy was sleeping, which should have been a red flag, but I simply said that all the children were sleeping and left it there. About an hour goes by, and it's definitely nighttime now. I'm sitting on a sofa downstairs and looking through some old magazines to pass the time. Suddenly, I hear shuffling on the staircase. The boy was clearly sleepwalking, but his eyes were open and rolled back. He started running his hands along the wall and grabbing family pictures while screaming, "They all must go, they all must go," before throwing the pictures down the stairs. Once I overcame a moment of sheer panic, I rushed up the stairs and tried to grab him. Once I was about half a foot away from him, he started screaming, "If you touch me, you die. If you touch me, you die," followed by manic laughter. By this point, the sound of crashing glass and screaming had woken up the girls, and I could hear them crying from the other room. Totally freaked out, but still focused on keeping the kid from falling down the stairs, I grabbed the boy by the back of his pajamas and led him back up the rest of the stairs toward his room. When we got to his doorway, he calmly walked over to his bed and got back in, as if nothing had happened. Flabbergasted, I went over to his bed and he was perfectly sound asleep. I could still hear the girls crying, so I rushed over to their room. They were huddled together in the back corner, crying. I said to them, "Oh, no, it's okay. Your brother's okay. He's just sleepwalking. He's fine." One of the little girls looked at me and said, "We know he can't help it. Simon makes him do it." That was the last straw for me. I didn't ask any more questions. I brought the girls downstairs with me, gave them milk and cookies, turned on the radio, and turned on every single light. The parents walked in and knew immediately what happened. I never babysat for that family again. Just before her 3rd birthday, my daughter and I were playing what we called the nap game. She would pretend to be the mom, and I would be the child, and she would put me down for a nap in her bed. After a few minutes of this, she decided to lay down with me. We were just laying there quietly in the dark when she said, "The other day when I was in bed, the Huggy thing came." I started asking her open-ended questions to get her to talk more about it. She told me the Huggy thing is a big, dark shadow with no shape. When she first saw it, it was sitting on her shelf. When it saw her, it came and started hugging her. She said it would hug her entire body very tightly, and this would make her head hurt. She said she would scream, and Daddy would come, and then the Huggy thing would crawl away, but it always came back. I made sure to keep my voice calm as we were talking, but she scared the crap out of me. My son, from the ages of 2 to 4, would be scared of the dark in only 2 places: his room, if the closet was open, or the basement bedroom at his great-grandparents'. When asked why, several times by several different people, the story was always the same. That's where the black was. So we thought it was just the dark in general, but it was only those 2 places. As he got better with his words, he kept calling it the black, but described it as a tall, faceless black figure with very long arms and legs. His description almost perfectly matched Slender Man. He's never seen anything like that prior to describing this. When we used to put him to bed, he would cry hysterically if the closet door wasn't closed, because the black would come and try to take him away at night. He switched rooms recently as my sister moved in with us, and it was the bigger of the 2 rooms. He's fine in his new room with the closet door open. When my dog is chilling in my now sister's room, the dog will often stare into the closet for extended periods of time, if the door is open. For a few months of time, some weird things were happening in our house. Rhythmic noises coming from the upstairs well after our kids were asleep. Boom, boom, boom. Every night around midnight. Late hours of the night, we would hear our bedroom floor creak very loudly. We had been living in our house for around 2 years, and this all randomly started, lasted a few months, and then went away. But to fulfill the topic, one day when my son was close to 2 years old, I was holding him while we were in our living room. He points to the wall, close to the area that my husband and I had figured where the rhythmic noises were coming from late at night, and starts crying and burying his head in my neck. I asked him what was wrong, and he starts screaming, the man in the wall, he comes out, I'm scared." So freaked out, It went away a few months later, and he never made any more comments. My youngest would often tell me about her other grandma, called Dot, who had purple hair and glasses. One day she was telling me that Dot loved the area we live in. She was 3, and I had no idea she even knew the name of the area. She also said they'd had a great time in France. We're in the UK, and again, I didn't even know she knew what France was. She asked me if I'd like for her to show me where Dot lived. So, in a humoring mood, I was like, sure, why not? So we started walking in a direction we'd never taken before, and she was just babbling away the entire time. Eventually, she stopped in the street, and her eyes kind of glazed a bit, and she said to me, "She was here, but she's gone now. Let's go to the nursery," and just turned to walk towards her nursery. We were standing outside of the funeral home. I may or may not have had a short bout of internal screaming on the way to the nursery that day. My son had just turned 3. His sister, who he called Sissy, was 15. One night, my husband and I were putting him to bed and reading him his bedtime story. Out of nowhere, he told us to tell Sissy not to come into his room at night. We were confused and asked, "Sissy comes into your room at night?" And he calmly replied, "Yeah, and she crawls on my ceiling like a spider and makes weird faces at me." My husband and I kind of freaked out, but kept our composure in front of our little guy and told him we'd tell her not to do it anymore. We even said it out loud in that moment, saying, "We do not give anyone permission to come into your bedroom at night." We told our daughter about it, and she kind of freaked out about it also. Our son hasn't mentioned his sister crawling on the ceiling since, but it was still very unsettling to say the least. She's seen shadow figures out of her peripheral vision upstairs by our room, and by our son's room. Hers is the first room when upstairs, followed by a long hallway with the bathroom on the right, and my son's and our rooms right next to one another on the left. She stated that she sees it run from the bathroom towards our rooms. And this isn't the first time our son has freaked us out, but we try not to entertain the fear as we believe it can attract more. When my son was still in his crib, he would drink a bottle filled with water when we were trying to transition him off milk. One night, we saw him on the baby monitor sitting up and talking. We started watching and listening to what he was doing and saying. He picked up his bottle and was holding it over the edge of his crib, just out of view of the camera. He was saying, "Take it. Here, take it." We went up there and asked him who he was talking to. He said his friend, but when we kept asking him who and where they were, he just wouldn't respond. Another incident was when he was staying in our bed as we were waiting for his new big boy bed to arrive. I was tucking him into our bed, and the only light we had in our room was from his sound machine. I was giving him a kiss, and he said, "What's that shadow behind you?" I immediately thought it was from the sound machine casting my shadow behind me, but when I looked up and noticed it on the other side of the room, I turned around, and no shadows were being cast behind me. It definitely gave me goosebumps. It's so hard because I don't want to dismiss what my children see because I believe them. At the same time, I don't want to add to the fear or scare them. So we acknowledge it, tell them if they ever get scared of what they see to tell whatever it is to go away and that it's not welcome here. I honestly don't know what else to do. Purple Mommy. When my son was first learning to talk, he would tell us about something called Purple Mommy. It could be an imaginary friend, but these details are a little bit creepy. Here's a few of them. Purple Mommy is all purple, with long hair and bright, all-white eyes. At the time, he mixed up purple with black, so he could have meant she was all black. Purple Mommy picks him up at night and turns off the lights. We would often find my son out of his crib in the morning, which would mean him crawling over the railing and onto the ground at a time when he was barely walking. Definitely found the lights in his room off a few times too, even though he's terrified of the dark. Purple Mommy needs a bandage because she has blood everywhere. Purple Mommy has no smile, meaning a mouth. And Purple Mommy can take her head off. Purple Mommy really doesn't like Daddy. He told us all this stuff over maybe a year, or a little more. If we ever asked where she was, he'd always point to the same spot, a corner of the room behind his open closet door. He would also wake up crying almost every night during this time. Once, during a really rough night, my wife went to ask him what was wrong, and his answer was, "Purple Mommy won't let me sleep."